Welcome to our Meet the Experts documentary panel. Joining me are Tommy Oliver, the director of 40 Years a Prisoner, Rick Rowley, the director of Kingdom of Silence, Mary Mazzio, who directed Most Beautiful Thing, and Kirby Dick and Amy Ziering, who directed On the Record. Now, all of your films are quite different from each other, but they have in common that in one way or another, they're sort of challenging like an American life or an American system, whether it's in the private sector or corruption in government or inequality in communities. So I guess kind of start with a big question, like speaking truth to power, is that sort of like a central core of what drives you as filmmakers? Let's start with Tommy.
It's something that for me, I don't even really think about. And to put it in perspective, people have talked about how 40 Years a Prisoner is so timely or so relevant to right now. But for me, the idea of Black lives, they don't matter anymore today than they did 5 years ago to me, or 10 years before that. It's just the world around us seems to have finally gotten to where they need to be. And so there's a sense of the things that are important. And whether somebody else sees that, that's up to them. And part of what we can sometimes do is we can elucidate, we can show the human side of things. But again, for me, these things aren't any more important. I grew up with these things. I grew up with people who were dealing with these issues my entire life. And so those are the things that I want to explore and be able to show in all of its beauty and complexity.
I love what you said earlier, Tommy, about, police brutality hasn't shifted. We're just taping it now,
Yeah, that was great.
And I thought that was spot on. And to your point, Daniel, I actually think there's a lot of overlap between many of our films. I mean, systemic racism is at the core, whether it's sexual assault, incarceration, or, trauma, the trauma that Mary's film shows that these people lived up. I mean, I don't know what I would do if I saw my best friend shot. And that was something I had at 10 years old to carry with me throughout my life. I don't know that I wouldn't implode. But it's this legacy of racism. It's 4 centuries of white oppression that's been unchecked and not even reflected on. And the only good thing out of COVID, out of this horrific time, I think has been that we all actually had a moment of pause and racial reckoning that I'm not sure would have happened otherwise if people weren't in their homes and could collectively reflect on something that is long overdue reflecting on. And whether that carries on, we'll see. But that at least was a crack in the universe that I didn't anticipate and hope carries forward.
Well, and I think as well, a camera was there, right? And the camera showed the brazen indifference to life of a white cop kneeling on a Black man's neck. And I think we have seen there have been thousands and thousands of George Floyds before George Floyd. And I think what made this a little bit different was we could see it full on. Many other videos you can't really see. There's a lot of activity. And I think it really woke up people who don't live in those communities, right? And I think there's been a greater understanding of how much more has to be done to create a true democratic society.
Yeah, I just like to add that, I think that that the Speaking Truth to Power, social justice documentaries are really, part of the cutting edge of documentary. Obviously, documentary is playing such an important role, not only in the entertainment business, but throughout culture. And I think, this has really exploded. Part of it, I think, has to do with the fact that it was initially a reaction to the oppression of the George W. Bush administration that I think a lot of filmmakers, I know that certainly affected me, just said, I have this capability. I want to, respond to this in some way or another. But I think creatively too. I mean, one of the things I kind of admire about all the films here and all these politically oriented films is that there's an edge they're exploring. It's not easy to make these kind of films. I mean, there's the risk that you're taking, and I think in any kind of art form, risk is at the center. And certainly, with Rick's film and films like that, I mean, risk it suffuses it. So I think this is something that's a very exciting aspect of documentary filmmaking that I think it's just beginning to get going. I certainly hope so.
I mean, and just to pile on, it's I mean, all of the films here on this panel are great examples of what has been core to filmmaking since it was invented. I mean, people are drawn to make documentary films to change the world. I mean, it always have been. And as documentary filmmakers, we have perhaps a more intimate relationship with the world and with reality than our brothers and sisters on the scripted side of the universe. But I mean, we're implicated already always in changing the things that we film. And so, I mean, it's baked into the documentary process that we're responsible to the world that we're filming. And it's only natural, I think, that that what I feel is the best of the documentary genre is engaged, hopeful films that are trying to change the world.
And one interesting thing about this era of documentary film is that it feels like documentaries have also never been more accessible than they are now, just given, it used to be this boutique art house theater experience. And now, your films can be seen on HBO or Showtime or Amazon Prime Video. And there's so many different ways to reach an audience now. Does it feel like this is sort of a golden age for that as well? Let's start with Mary.
Absolutely. I mean, let me just show you. Fila dropped the most beautiful thing shoe, right? I'm just off an event hosted by Pepsi and the Miami Dolphins. I mean, that sort of cultural currency around what is fundamentally exposing deep-seated issues that we have to attack, like that's really exciting. And I feel like these platforms, whether it's HBO Max or Showtime or Amazon or Peacock or they give us power with great visibility, right? Because in the old days, you sort of had like this little theatrical run and then who saw it and nobody saw it. And I feel like now true change is possible. And, our last film dealt with sex trafficking. And it was called I Am Jane Doe. And I think it's fair to say that if we had not partnered with Netflix on that, that ended up catalyzing bipartisan legislation amazingly. And again, we had a platform that could reach so many stakeholders in power. And so I feel like we're vanguards in many ways, like all of us here. And I think we all share the same trait of utilizing our skills to push forward positive change.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think one of the things that's kind of getting so much attention is true crime, and obviously you can make a film about a crime, and it can be very much an analysis of a social justice issue. But I think we're seeing so many of these things getting greenlit that are just focusing on the sensational and nothing more, and so it's interesting. It is kind of the best of times, the worst of times. I mean, I think it feels like we're kind of at a tipping point here where things could, as Amy said, could consolidate, and maybe it's going to be more difficult for these films to get made or get seen. I'm not sure. I don't know, but we all are obviously very suspect of consolidation of corporate power. And of course, these streamers, that's exactly what they are.
And yeah, and I do want to clarify, that wasn't, I love your movie and everyone should watch it. And it is, amazing. All of your films are amazing. I haven't seen yours, Tommy, but my God, I want to see it. And I want you to do a podcast just because it hasn't gone out yet. But so that wasn't, I was just trying to sort of not still be reading, what really is going on in the power structure and what's still getting rewarded and what's not.
Well, again, all I'm going to say is as somebody who has had to claw, right? Like we're not greenlit. We go make films, we figure out a way to get them seen. So we're actually always outside the system, right? And so you guys get greenlit and you should, and fantastic. But I'm less worried about sort of that power structure because you have to be entrepreneurial. Like, how do you get your stuff seen? I think it's hard.
And one interesting thing about documentaries to me is how much footage that all of you have to work with, whether it's archival, whether it's interviews. Like when I look at like an awards year every year, I think honestly every nominee for best editing should be a documentary because of how much work seems to go into it. So like how involved is that process? We'll start with Rick.
Yeah, I mean, it's the footage even is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, we had hundreds of hours of footage that we shot ourselves, and of course we have a person whose entire life was like much of it was spent in front of a camera with mountains of archival. But more important than that, our subject is in the world, like living, with a history that stretches back centuries in a future that goes forward. And so, I mean, our task more than anything is finding the clear arc that cuts through the chaos, not just of the footage that you've shot, but of that weird moment in time that you choose to frame, and finding a truth that feels important and powerful and valuable enough to tell. And once you have that, then things fall away and the structure reveals itself. Yeah, I mean, I think the beginning of that editing and culling process is probably like the beginning of the writing process in a narrative project. It's just it's our raw material and the plastic we work from isn't just the pixels and the frames. It's the entire like beating heart of a human life. It's incredibly daunting.
So as somebody who's also a writer, I'd say they're actually pretty different. And the reason is that as a writer, you typically know where something's going before you start. And so you'll think about it, you'll figure it out, you'll maybe have an outline, probably have an outline or a treatment. And at least in my case, so I was also I cut my film with a partner. And so the two of us, we didn't have any assistants, we didn't have anything. It was just us and the archival and all several hundred hours of it. And for me, like you said, sort of the structure reveals itself, but you have to allow it to do that. And you have to be open to sort of where things go. And so in my case, I had no idea where things would go at all. I had no idea what would happen with the stuff I was shooting present day. I also didn't really know how I was going to tell because half the film is present day, half the film is archival. I didn't really know where the archival stuff was going to go because there was no definitive account of what happened, nor how the hybrid sort of structure would work, balancing between the two. And so it was very much just sort of listening to the film, staying true to the emotion, which is for me the thing that made the most sense. Is just figuring out how to stay on this journey, how to make sure everything else is out of the way. The cinematography, the editing, the whatever, everything is just in service of the emotional journey and trying to tell a story that is honest and accurate and without bias, because that was a big part of what Move, which is one of the subjects of the film, dealt with in the 70s.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I mean, Tommy, I think the not knowing is what makes for an interesting documentary. It's not knowing in advance where it's going to go makes for an exploration. And again, that's what makes this a very interesting art form. And that's in documentaries that you can see that, audiences can see that the filmmaker is discovering the subject matter, the understanding of their main subject, and even the formal process of how they're going to put this together. You can see that when you watch a film, and I think audiences respond to that, and I think that's one of the reasons that documentaries are so dynamic right now, is because we've seen 100 years of sort of the conventional 3-act structure of scripted, filmmaking television. And I think audiences can almost read that now. But with a documentary, you sit down to a documentary, unless it's just I don't know, a music in the 90s or something, you really don't know where it's going to go. And I think that's very exciting for audiences. And it's, obviously, I think it's very exciting for filmmakers as well.
And terrifying at the same time.
True.
Right?
Well, without terror, why do anything?
I'd agree. I mean, there's the idea of nothing ventured, nothing gained, and so it's like we don't know where it's going to go, and so you big risk, big reward. And these things, they might not work. They might not work creatively. You might spend a lot of your time and realize it's just not working.
Yeah.
And so that's part of it.
Yeah.
Or conversely, you find those things that are just magic, either that thing that happened or those things that work together and just right next to each other. And it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. But that's part of the exploration, to your point, Kirby, that when people watch it, you get to feel that with them, because there's such a dynamic feel to it. And so, especially when done right, and not the sort of just the informational doc, because those exist and it's different. But when it's something where it's so much about the emotional journey, it's just a different thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I want to thank all of you for joining me today for this discussion and for this exploration of documentary film, which I love. I hope everyone seeks out your films. Kingdom of Silence, 40 Years a Prisoner, Most Beautiful Thing, On the Record, and continue to support documentaries. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, everyone.